Let's start this talk by introducing Norman Foster, a leading architect of the 20th century. Norman Foster. I want you to keep this image in your mind until the end of our conversation. Picture Norman Foster drawing, surrounded by pencils, open boxes of pencils, because it's through the pencil that this boy, born in a poor neighborhood of Manchester, a city in decline, became arguably the most powerful architect in the world. Through the pencil and his left hand, this brilliant left-handed artist we'll be talking about today. And we'll also talk about his beginnings, starting in a Manchester that's well represented by this painting by L.S. Lowry, the city's painter. A painting created just 5 years before Foster was born titled Coming Out of the Factory, which vividly conveys the depressed condition of that British industrial city. And that's where young Norman was born, an only child to modest parents. Though you might see them here dressed in their Sunday best, his mother was a homemaker, and his father worked at a pawn shop. They could give him love, but they couldn't provide intellectual, artistic, or even financial support for him to attend university. What would give him all of that was drawing. Norman was born in a neighborhood where no one had ever gone to university. When he turned 16 and finished school, something many didn't even complete, most looked for a job, and he did the same. He found work as a janitor at the town hall, where he stayed for 2 years. But deep down, he knew he wanted something more. At 18, he had to do his military service, spending 2 years in the Navy as a radio operator, all the while thinking, I want to get out of Manchester. Engels once said that the quickest way out of Manchester was alcohol, but for him, drawing was the quickest path out. For his parents, this was a real crisis. They thought having a job at the town hall was fantastic, a huge social leap. Being a public employee was something they couldn't understand why he didn't want to return to. He goes to a career guidance office, something created after World War II to help soldiers find new job placements. They give him some good advice. You need to pursue an artistic career. Artistic? A job? He manages to get into an architecture office, but only as an accounting assistant, leveraging the administrative skills he had acquired at the town hall. But at night, he takes the drawings home and copies them, drawing tirelessly. After a year, he timidly knocks on his boss's door and says, Mr. Barrisley, which was the name of his boss, the chief architect of the office, I want to go to university. Barrisley responds, but you can't go. You don't have any drawings. Norman replies, yes, I do have drawings. Barrisley, surprised, asks how that's possible, and Norman confesses that he's been taking the drawings home at night, returning them early in the morning and copying them at home. The next day, Norman brings in a portfolio of his drawings, and immediately the architect recognizes his talent. His boss moves him from the accounting department to the design office. They give him a drafting table and a copy of what was then the equivalent of the Neufer used by architects, and he is assigned to work on a project. Not long after, this young man, coming from a working-class family in a neighborhood where no one had ever gone to university, or even considered studying seriously, enters university. There are 2 schools he can choose from. One offers him a scholarship and covers his tuition, but it's not the best. He says, I want to go to the university, the better one. His county authorities say they won't pay for a scholarship there, but he responds, it doesn't matter. I'll pay for my studies by working. He finds tough jobs that pay the most in the least amount of time, unloading trucks and similar tasks. He enrolls in the university and pays for his studies, studies his parents couldn't even dream of affording. In school, drawing becomes his signature skill. Much of the money he earns comes from winning drawing competitions. They organize drawing courses like the one you see here, what they call measured drawings, scaled drawings. Generally, In the more conventional schools of the time, these were classical or Georgian structures, but he says, no, no, and even revolutionizes this by starting to draw vernacular architecture, in this case, a windmill. Or also the drawings he creates every summer, using the money he earns from drawing competitions to travel and see as much architecture as he can across Europe. Here you can see one of his drawings of Le Corbusier's Ronchamp. He explores and studies everything he can from Le Corbusier, Alto, and those masters we've talked about, because architecture is created by societies, by culture, by sensitivity, by clients, and by demands, but also by other architectures. That's why we have to connect them with the masters of the 21st century, but often the masters of the 20th century will appear as essential references to understanding the 21st century. That's why we can't understand Foster without knowing that he drew Le Corbusier, that he sketched Alvar Aalto, and later went to America to study the works of Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright. He finishes his studies after 5 years and earns a scholarship to go to the United States, his dream. This scholarship was usually reserved for students from Oxford and Cambridge, and he is the first student not from those universities to win it. In fact, he doesn't just win one scholarship, but 2, the Fulbright and the Henry scholarships. In the end, he chooses the Henry Scholarship. Why? Because the Henry Scholarship came with a green card, allowing him to work in America. With the Fulbright, he could only study. It covered his tuition, but he wasn't allowed to work. So, he applied for both, got both, and chose the one that would let him work in America, which reveals his mindset. He goes to America, not just to study, but to experience a new world from the ground up. He chooses the most unlikely place for this, Yale University, a bastion of privilege where traditionally only the affluent classes of America attended. But what happens? At that time, Yale is a hotbed of extraordinary talent. The most recent buildings were designed by Louis Kahn. The director of the architecture school is Paul Rudolph, and Serge Chermayeff and James Sterling are regular instructors. The professors at Yale at that time are the best in America, and young Foster finds himself in a school that's very different from what he's used to. The school he attended in Manchester was a 9-to-5 affair, but Yale? Yale is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, non-stop. Paul Rudolph, the director, is a singular, charismatic figure with a crew cut, a somewhat military appearance, gay, and a tireless worker. He calls students to meet at 3 in the morning and expects them to work all the time, even through the night. Norman works tirelessly, but during the first critique, Rudolph tells him, "You haven't worked hard enough." For a young man like Norman, this is devastating. He wonders, what do I have to do to measure up? What do I have to do? What can I do? In the end, he rises to the challenge, imitating Paul Rudolph's drawings at first, because he still hasn't developed his own style. He draws well, but he doesn't yet have his own language, so he imitates Paul Rudolph. Here we see him presenting a project to a jury, a project he drew in the style of Paul Rudolph. But the most important thing about Yale is that, of the 3 Britons